Good evening, everyone. I am Chris, and I'm here to give you my review on Nosferatu. I'm going to have to try and not do the, that was an awful, like, Romanian Transylvanian accent. The 2024 remake, the one that's just out, Robert Eggers's fourth film, following The Witch, The Lighthouse, Northman. And actually, this is the second remake of Nosferatu. Of course, you had the original 1922. And then there was the Werner Herzog one, which I actually only discovered was a thing maybe about a week ago from 1979. I did want to do a little bit more research before doing this review. I must admit, I'd had every intention of rewatching the original silent film, as well as that 1979 remake before going into this one. And unfortunately, time just escaped me, so I didn't get time to watch it. I also, in terms of Robert Eggers's previous films, I still haven't seen The Northman, and I've heard fantastic things about it. And again, I was trying to watch that one before this one, but that's a lot of films and very limited free time. So unfortunately, I didn't get around to any of them. So please take my review with as much as you can. But I have seen the original 1922 film many, many years ago now, but its reputation kind of precedes it, doesn't it? So yeah, the second remake of Nosferatu. And in many ways, you could argue perhaps it's the third remake, because Nosferatu itself and the circumstances surrounding that original film are very interesting, because it's essentially just a complete plagiarism of Dracula. It was made to, they change characters' names and whatnot, but inherently the plot is basically identical to Bram Stoker's Dracula, as far as I'm aware. So yeah, it's interesting. They didn't want to pay the royalties of doing an outright depiction, so names got changed and whatnot. Dracula was changed to Count Orlok and whatnot. So yeah, very interesting. But the original film, like the original copies of it, they were almost all destroyed because of the legalities and the plagiarism essentially that took place. But thankfully for the history of film, many copies still remained, and now we can pretty much view it whenever we want to. The original film is very striking, and when I heard that Robert Eggers was doing a remake of this, I actually can't remember when it was announced. I was really excited for it because I do really like the previous two Robert Eggers movies that I've seen. And I'm sure that I'll enjoy The Northman as well, and I will get round to watching that at some point. And I know that this was a passion project for him as well. He's already proved himself a very striking filmmaker, cinematography-wise, and his attention to detail in terms of languages, dialects, and all the period pieces that he's done before, with very accurate, in my opinion, a dialect and cadences and whatnot. The Lighthouse, especially, how you have the kind of like sea shanty, seafaring captains and whatnot. All of that stuff's great, and that also bleeds into this one as well, no pun intended, with Nosferatu. So it seems like a lot of people have been going to see this one. I've seen a lot of talk about it and whatnot. So yeah, I went to it today. I think has it been out for about a week now? So fairly late to it, I suppose. But I went to see it this morning to a packed out audience. So it's great to see that people, I honestly think that Robert Eggers is going to be one of those directors where, if he isn't so already, kind of like a Christopher Nolan, where people will go to see a film based on the director, which is great to hear, So I guess just sort of going into my initial opinions on this one, what did I think of it? I thought it was a very, very well-made movie. There's a lot of positives about this one. Mostly the cinematography, chief among them, is outstanding. Pretty much every single frame throughout the film. You can tell that a lot of heart went into this, and as I mentioned, it's a passion project for Robert Eggers. I think actually he wanted to make this as his second film, but then he made The Lighthouse, and then he made The Northman, and then this has ended up being his fourth film. Is it an accurate retelling of the original? It's been a while since I've seen the original. I think so, but I think the standouts for me in this are definitely the cinematography and just like the filmmaking sensibilities. The mood and the tone is a little bit inconsistent at some points, but overall, what I really liked about it is that you feel that threat from Count Orlok, from Nosferatu, all the way through the movie. And I'd be interested to see how much screen time Orlok is actually on screen for, because I don't feel like it's that much, really. He's used very, very sparingly, but very effectively. It's almost like the Jaws effect, is that his presence and that looming dread it's felt throughout, even when you don't directly see him, and even when you do see him, he's very much obscured in shadows. And when you see him in full, very much in full, which is really funny. I think Nicholas Hoult, who's in the movie, who plays the character of Thomas Hutter, he actually kept that. So you see Orlok full frontal, basically, is what I'm getting at in this. And Nicholas Hoult, for some reason, owns and has framed on his wall the fake penis that Bill Skarsgård wore for Count Orlok, which is really funny. So yeah, you feel that threat, you feel that looming darkness, and I think that's exemplified beautifully through the cinematography. One of my favorite shots in the film is where Orlok stands at a window and holds his hand out, and then the camera sort of follows his hand and the shadow created by his hand across the city, and then the shadow of his hand stretches out across the city as this plague and pestilence spreads across the land. And I thought there were a lot of effective shots like that, and different creative ways they showed that malevolent spirit, because Orlok really is just evil incarnate. You know, he's compared a lot of times to the Grim Reaper and death itself and the devil, and everything in between. Debauchery, pestilence, sin, everything, kind of every evil thing sort of rolled into one person. Skarsgård's voice, it's I suppose it's a good voice for Orlok. It is a little bit hokey in some respects. He I feel like, I hope he isn't getting typecast into playing sort of like crazy horror characters at the moment, what with playing Pennywise, and I think he's been in a few other horror things as well, hasn't he? But he talks in the very very Bela Lugosi Dracula, and in between his sentences he's just like, oh, and he really draws that out. So very much becomes the character. 6 hours a day of prosthetics to get into the character of Count Orlok as well. If I didn't know that was Bill Skarsgård before going into it, I probably would be blissfully unaware as to who was playing the character. He really embodies the character. And there's a lot of creepy imagery with him, whether it's very much harkening back to the 1922 film where he's just stood in a doorway and whatnot. To my knowledge, they don't recreate the iconic shot, the shadow up the staircase. Maybe they thought they didn't want to step on the toes of the original there by trying to recreate that. But I know there's a few other shots peppered throughout which do harken back and mirror the original, but they don't do that one. And to me, that's the most iconic shot from Nosferatu. So maybe Eggers thought, I don't want to do that again. Let that be preserved with the original. Now, my problems with this movie, because I do have some problems with this movie. Personally, I don't think this is as strong as The Witch or The Lighthouse. And the reason for that is that some of the performances in this are a little bit hokey sometimes. And I feel like it falls into very typical horror traits that we've seen. That could stem from the initial story itself. But I think in just how it's handled, I think that maybe in hindsight now, I potentially find the 1922 film even creepier than this. And a lot of that is going back and watching some old silent film era stuff. It is inherently creepy now, watching it again from the kind of stuttering, like the frame rate, like how it's kind of sped up a little bit, the really overly theatrical acting, which kind of gives it this kind of like uncanny feeling and feels a little bit creepy in some respects. It's almost like an acid trip, almost watching some like silent film era stuff. The grainy quality of it all, the unrefined look of certain things. There's an inherent creepiness, I always think, to old films like that. And I do still think in some respects, Nosferatu, the original, is still very creepy. It is a little bit tongue-in-cheek. It is a little bit hokey in some respects now with hindsight, but you imagine at the time that would be terrifying. So I do think that a lot of that is lost in this modern remake because it's been over 100 years since that movie came out. So a lot has changed with cinema. But I feel because of that, this film does fall into a lot of typical horror tropes that we've seen many, many, many times. So many jump scares in this one. And I actually think the strongest scares in this movie are those sense of dread and just that disturbing feeling, almost like The Shining, which is probably one of my favorite horror films, in that there's not loads of jump scares throughout the movie. It really is that haunting quality of the Overlook Hotel and the ghostly things that are happening around that just create that sense of dread, and you're kind of thinking there's always going to be some horrific thing around every corner, and it builds and builds and builds. And to that end, this film is as a success when it does that stuff. But I think a lot of it is a character walking through a dark corridor, pauses, turns round, bang, jump scare, and Orlok's there, or whatever it is. And it's almost predictable now. I feel like I've seen enough horror films where I just go like 3, 2, 1, jump scare, the orchestra, the soundtrack blares, and you get jump scared. And I'm just kind of over that. So there was a lot of cheap jump scares in this one, which I felt were kind of unnecessary and almost cheapened the experience a little bit. On top of that, there are a lot of tropes in terms of oh god, what's her name? Lily Rose Depp's character of Ellen Hutter, who is possessed by Orlok many times, and she goes into convulsions or goes into a fit or whatnot, starts doing the whole exorcist thing, like your mother sucks cocks in hell kind of thing. And again, those exorcist tropes have been played out in so many exorcist movies that I feel like it's all been done before, and it's not really presenting anything new. And when it is presenting it, it's done kind of hokily. Like there was some bits with Lily Rose Depp's character where she's going full possessed mode, and she's like rolling her eyes to the back of her head, and she's doing this crazy shit with like her tongue, like and she's like drooling. And I wondered if it was meant to be unintentionally funny, because it felt like the film was trying to make it really horrific and to scare you, but a lot of the times I was almost holding back laughter. I do appreciate how physical she got with the role. She is doing the crab walk pose almost, and she's like writhing around on the bed and contorting her face and whatnot, but it did come across as a little bit hokey to me in some respects. And I don't, if that was the intention and they were trying to go for like a bit of campiness with it, then I understand that. But for the most part, it felt like the tone was trying to go for this really serious, menacing, somber tone throughout. So when bits were thrown in like that, it kind of took me out of the experience a little bit. Performances I did really enjoy. Skarsgård I thought was really good as Orlok. A lot of people have mentioned the moustache as well on Count Orlok, but they're going for very much a Vlad the Impaler look. So the moustache stayed, I guess. And other Dracula interpretations. Gary Oldman had a moustache in the Francis Ford Coppola one, didn't he? Willem Dafoe's in it as well. He's fucking great. I love him. I guess he's sort of playing the Van Helsing-like character in this adaptation. And Willem Dafoe always has so much of a presence, whether he's being, really intimidating and serious, whether he's being a little bit wacky and jovial. And I feel like out of any of the characters in this one, that Willem Dafoe strikes that balance absolutely perfectly. And I was kind of hooked every single time he was on the screen. You've got Ralph Ineson returning again. He was in, I haven't seen The Northman, so I'm not sure if he was in that or not, but he was in The Witch. Really, really commanding presence with his voice, very unique and identifiable voice. So I quite liked his character as well. If there was a weak link in the performances, I feel like Aaron Taylor Johnson as Friedrich Harding was probably the weakest. He didn't feel believable to me. There were some respects where it felt like he was almost treading the line of, not quite as bad, but treading the line of Keanu Reeves's character in Bram Stoker's Dracula, where it was, oh yes, I'm posh British Englishman, yes. And it felt a little bit disingenuous at some point. It almost felt like a caricature of someone from that time period, and he felt probably the most out of place and not as quite as naturalistic as all the other performances in the film, I felt. What else can I say about this film? I have a phobia of rats, and there are a lot of rats in this movie. When the plague, strikes and pestilence is crawling, like, oh my god, it's horrible watching all those rats run around. And there is some grisly stuff in this movie. I mean, my god, there's child murder, there's necrophilia, there's some disturbing shit in this film. I felt like they could have perhaps showed more of the deaths. A lot happen off camera. And I feel like they could have played up the horror aspect of that. For me, the best part of the whole film, and probably the best part of the Nosferatu story, really, is where you have Nicholas Holt's character going to Orlok's castle. And I feel like that at that point you have the most creative cinematography, the better sense of dread, and some really cool, almost like dreamlike stuff that they do. My favorite part of the cinematography, it's actually the background of this video, but I realized that my webcam's kind of obscuring it all, is where, as I said, almost very dreamlike, Nicholas Hoult makes his way to Orlok's castle, and it's kind of shot in black and white. You have this phantom carriage, which I think is actually a reference and a homage to another silent film, where it's not pulled by any horses. This ghostly carriage, almost in silence, just pulls up and opens its door, ready to bring Nicholas Hoult to the castle. I thought that stuff was absolutely gorgeous and really atmospheric, and the whole sort of Eastern European, Romanian vibe with the gypsy encampment and everything leading to the castle, how isolated it was in the mountains and how cold and unforgiving and unfeeling it all felt. And the sense of isolation and just darkness, inherent deep darkness of that castle, and Orlok's spirit permeated through like all the stone walls. You kind of had the hellhounds as well, the wolves bearing after and chasing after Nicholas Hoult. All of that stuff I thought was great. And then the film does slow a little bit. I do think it lulls, and maybe that's a problem inherently with the story of Nosferatu. I do think it really slows down once you get to the mainland and you get off the ship. I do think this film is a little bit too long. It kind of clocks in at around 2 hours 15, and I do think they could have easily shaved off about 15 minutes off this just to make it a little bit even. I also think that it kind of suffers from a lack of an ending, and I won't say like a lack of humanity to it, because not that I want characters cracking jokes every now and then, but I do think that in horror films, the human condition and the human spirit is very important. Whether, you know, good triumphs at the end or whether evil wins, I do think you need to at least root for the characters. And I think maybe in some respects you get a little bit of the, not as bad, I think you get a bit of the Christopher Nolan effect, where everything is so cold and disconnected that I feel like sometimes you struggle to connect with the people within the film. I think this film does it better than some of Christopher Nolan's films. You know, you get the likes of Tenet, for example, where everything's just very, very emotionally removed. And it feels like, it almost feels like an AI's constructed that movie. Someone completely devoid of human emotion and human connection. Where this film ends, I feel like it just ends really abruptly. It's like, right, there we go. We told the story of Nosferatu. You know, everything's been sorted out. There we go. Cut to credits. And I like that follow through to sort of, where are our characters going to go after this? How do they deal with this? And I would have liked to have seen it. I realize I just said that I felt like 15 minutes could have been shaved off it. And I stand by that, but I felt like we needed more of an ending. It felt just very abrupt, like, right, okay, done and dusted. Dust our hands off and hit the credits. So it kind of leaves you with a feeling of, oh, that's it. Okay, well, I guess the film's over. That's kind of how I felt about it a little bit, and maybe I'm in the minority on that. I'm seeing a lot of people are really positive with this one, and I will say it is cool to see a return to form for gothic horror. You know, like evil castles, black and white, dark, evil, sort of like malignant presence all the way throughout. That's really cool, and I do think that with the failed attempt at the reboot of the Dark Universe, which began and ended with the Mummy film with Tom Cruise, I do think they missed a trick, because I think if they'd have made the films like this and stayed true to the core essence of the original Universal Monsters films, I think they could have had something special. For example, if they made a Dracula film like this and kickstarted it all off, and then a Frankenstein movie like this and whatnot, I really think they could have built to, you know, honoring the original and the aesthetic and the feel and the gothic quality to those older 1920s, 1930s films, but modernizing it in terms of what we can do with horror now, perhaps. That would have definitely been the best way to go, rather than resorting to a generic, really terrible action summer blockbuster flick for The Mummy. The Brendan Fraser one's great. You know, that's kind of done in a very Indiana Jones action adventure style. It still did have a lot of the campy qualities of something from the Universal Monsters movies, but it had some horror elements to it, but it was definitely very much sort of tongue-in-cheek action adventure film fun, whereas the Tom Cruise one really wasn't that. It was just boring action with just unlikable characters. Personally, to me, I hated that film, and I don't know many people that do like that film. It sank the dark universe that they were trying to get off the ground. But I did get a trailer before this of Lee Whannell's new The Wolfman film. And I actually do wonder if Lee Whannell's kind of kickstarting this Blumhouse dark universe himself, because he did The Invisible Man a good few years ago, and I actually really enjoyed that take as a modern, updated take on it. I thought that was quite creative with some good performances and some good scares in that one. So he's now doing The Wolfman. So it looks pretty generic, I suppose, from the trailer as Wolfman films go, but I'm down for it. I really liked his take on The Invisible Man, so I kind of want him to do, you know, like a take on Dracula and to do a take on Frankenstein and whatnot. Creature from the Black Lagoon. Let's do them all and see what we can do. So yeah, that looked interesting. So yeah, I guess that's my review on Nosferatu. I don't think I want to drag this out any longer. It is atmospheric, and it does have some really beautiful imagery to it, and I think that's definitely the strength of the movie, is the cinematography and shot composition and whatnot. Some really great performances. However, I do think it is devoid of that humanity a little bit. And I would have liked to have seen a more sort of like thorough ending to these characters. It felt very cut off. The horror aspects themselves and the story, it does feel very been there, done that. It feels very tried and tested, and a lot of horror tropes that you've seen from every Exorcist movie, the whole like power of Christ compels you kind of thing, and just a lot of jump scares, which I felt really cheapened the film. Is there anything inherently wrong with the original 1922 film? Maybe not. Maybe that should have been preserved. I haven't seen the 1979 film, so I would like to rewatch the original and that 79 film, and then just really sort of gauge my opinions as to which one I prefer, and maybe offer a bit more of an effective comparison than I'm doing right now. But I think overall, which one would I rather watch again? I mean, just by modern film standpoint, I think, you know, I'd probably be more engaged with this one, but there is a special place in film history and the look and feel of that original 1922 Nosferatu film, which I don't think can be replicated, and maybe shouldn't be replicated, because it is very iconic. You know, it's been parodied and homaged in a whole bunch of stuff. But yeah, it's a solid film. I mean, comparing it to the shower of shit that we have released at the cinema, it is a breath of fresh air, and it is nice to see a director that has such a striking style. You can tell it was a passion project, and he really cares about the filmmaking side of things. The film itself didn't massively do a lot for me, though, but it was kind of nice seeing one of these gothic horror films again. The set design as well, I didn't mention that. The production design, the costumes, the on-location shooting, the look of the town and the castle and whatnot is all beautiful stuff. It's all beautifully idealized and shown on screen. So, and the attention to detail in the accents and the languages and whatnot, I really appreciate all that stuff. And it does make it feel more of an authentic experience. So I guess that'll do it for my review on Nosferatu. So I'm probably going to round off here. So thank you to everyone who, I was going to say who tuned in. If you're watching this after the fact, please do let me know your thoughts on Nosferatu. If you have seen the original, if you have seen the 70s one, how would you stack it up to this one? So please do let me know your thoughts on it, whether that's the original, the 70s one, or this one. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And please do consider subscribing to the channel as well for more movie reviews, discussions, and live streams. There'll be unboxing videos as well. I've got a lot of content planned for this year of 2025. And yeah, I'll be live again tomorrow with Dale, not talking about Nosferatu or scary vampire films. I'll be talking about Disney, so something hopefully a little bit more wholesome. We'll be doing our review on Encanto, as we've been reviewing all of the Disney animated classics. JX Editor says, they schnapps they make in these parts. Schnapps are actually referred to by Willem Dafoe in the movie, which is probably the only joke in the movie that I heard people chuckle at. So yeah, schnapps are some good stuff. Anyway, I'm going to round this video off here. Short and sweet one today. Thank you to everyone who tuned in, and I will see you on the next one. Take care.